Are you looking for the best motherboards? In this video, we will look at some of the 5 best motherboards on the market. Before we get started with our video, we have included links in the description. So make sure you check those out to see which one is in your budget range. Number 1. Asus ROG Strix X670E Gaming. The Asus ROG Strix X670E Gaming is one of the best motherboards you can buy for Ryzen 7000 or 9000. For starters, it comes with a plethora of PCIe X16 and M.2 slots, but what sets this board apart from the rest is that most of these run at PCIe 5.0 speeds, 2 of the X16 and 3 of the M.2 slots. That's a ton of PCIe 5.0 even for an X670E, most of which offer just 2 PCIe 5.0 M.2 ports for SSDs. The Strix also has an 18+2 stage design for its VRMs, which is more than enough even for the highest-end Ryzen 9 9950X, and support for DDR5-8000. This board doesn't skimp out on the boring stuff, either. The Strix has 8 fan headers, an error code display, SSD heatsinks, and an obscene number of front-facing USB ports. The rear I/O also has a ton of USB ports, 12 USB 3.2 Gen 2 and one 3.2 Gen 2x2. The Ethernet on the Strix is Intel's 2.5 gigabit, which isn't the fastest, but it's still a good amount for gamers and even content creators, not to mention that Intel's Ethernet NICs are usually the best. The 5 audio jacks plus optical audio might also be appealing if you're into that sort of thing. Number 2. MSI MPG X870E Carbon Wi-Fi. AMD's latest chipset for the AM5 platform is here, with X870E motherboards joining the product stack. The MSI MPG X870E Carbon Wi-Fi is a top-tier motherboard with most of the latest connectivity standards, including PCIe 5.0, DDR5-8400+ support, USB 4.0, 5GBE networking, and Wi-Fi 7 with Bluetooth 5.4. In our testing, it got some truly amazing scores with the AMD Ryzen 7 9800X3D, and the benchmarks are just the start of the story. This motherboard has many ports, headers, and slots to fit any, and potentially all, of your devices and storage disks. You get 2 USB-C 4.0 ports at 40 gigabits per second, 2 USB-C at 10 gigabits per second, and 9 USB-A ports at 10 gigabits per second. There are no USB 2.0 or 5 gigabits per second ports at all, making this a push towards faster USB devices while still maintaining backward compatibility. Number 3. Gigabyte X870E Aorus Master. The Gigabyte X870E Aorus Master is another premium motherboard with the newest X870E chipset, designed to get the most out of your AM5 compatible Ryzen CPUs. It has a 16+2+2 VRM solution rated at 110A for overclocking support, which is handy if you picked up the Ryzen 7 9800X3D before stocks ran out. It supports up to DDR5-8600 and has AI overclocking to find the best settings for your specific hardware configuration. You get 4 M.2 NVMe SSD slots, with 3 of them being PCIe 5.0, plus tons of USB ports, including 2 USB 4.0 with 40 gigabits per second, for USB-A 3.2 Gen 2, 4 USB-A 3.2 Gen 1, and 2 USB-A 2.0. Rounding out the connectivity, you get Wi-Fi 7, Bluetooth 5.4, and 5GBE networking. I've been testing the Intel version, and while the specifications are awesome, they're not the best part for me. It's the quality of life improvements, of which there are many. The Wi-Fi antenna is a simple push-on instead of the screw pigtails you might be used to. All the M.2 slots are toolless, so no more losing tiny screws, and the heatsinks that go over them are toolless and have magnets to easily line them up. The main PCIe 5.0 X16 slot has an easy unlatch button, and you get debug LEDs, which are always nice to see. Number 4. Asus TUF Gaming X870 Plus Wi-Fi. Asus TUF gaming range is often our best value recommendation, as it brings powerful features to a lower mid-range price point. It's slightly more expensive than the range we usually recommend as best, so the X870 chipset version for AMD's AM5 platform is getting its own section in this guide. That's also because it's good enough to stand alone, as it brings flagship-level features from the X670E range to the more affordable price bracket. You get a 16 plus 2 plus 1 80A VRM solution with larger heatsinks than last generation to keep thermals in check. That's enough power for even the most powerful Ryzen 7000 or Ryzen 9000 processors, and it'll work well in most builds with a more dialed-back design than the yellow used on previous TUF boards. You also get 4 M.2 SSD slots, with 2 being PCIe 5.0 and 2 PCIe 4.0. That's plenty of speedy storage slots, and you also get 1 PCIe 5.0 x16 slot, ready for the next generation of GPUs when they arrive. This chipset can support up to DDR5-8000 RAM and comes with one USB 4.0 40 gigabits per second port, 8 other USB ports, Wi-Fi 7, and 2.5 GBE networking. Plus, you get a redesigned BIOS that's now HD and plenty of AI overclocking tools to help you get the best out of your system. Number 5. Gigabyte A620i AMD AM5 ITX Motherboard. The A620 chipset is the entry-level offering from AMD for Ryzen 7000 processors. While these motherboards are supposed to go with low-end Ryzen CPUs, you could get one for a mid-range chip instead. You could even use a Ryzen 9 chip, though I'd recommend not doing so, considering my experience of using such motherboards. The Gigabyte A620i is modest but sufficient when it comes to features. It has a decent 5 plus 2 plus 1 stage VRM with a heatsink, and it should be enough for non-X SKUs and probably also the 7600X, 7700X, and 7800X 3D, and the 65W Ryzen 9000 series chips. Given that this is a mini ITX board, it only has 2 RAM slots, which is okay because you'll get better speeds. It has a single PCIe 4.0 M.2 slot for NVMe SSDs. The rear I/O is also decent, with 2 USB-A 2.0 ports, 1 USB-A 3.2 Gen 2, 2 USB-A 3.2 Gen 1 and 1 USB-C 3.2 Gen 1 port, and Gigabit Ethernet. Other A620 boards like MSI's Pro A620ME are mostly the same and a little cheaper, but I prefer Gigabyte's board since its VRM setup is a tiny bit bigger and has a heatsink, whereas most other A620 boards have fewer VRMs and no heatsink.